trying to get going. So thank you so much for coming out, guys, to this 5-level presentation on units 5 and 6. We're getting closer and closer to the AP exam, so I can imagine anxiety is going up, but maybe some confidence is too. And I hope the confidence is, because honestly, guys, this is your test. I love to say this whenever I get in front of AP students. You know, I always like to say this is your test every year, but this year is your year. Why do I say that? You guys all know what the changes are by now, I'm sure. The test now is a DBQ test. It is 45 minutes. You're gonna get 5 documents. You just get 1 question, right? That probably is just like, holy cramoly, that raises my anxiety, Mr. Zucker. You gotta be crazy with me. But actually, it is your test. And here's why it's your test, guys. If you guys just are able to set up some basic things of understanding each one of the periods, okay, with 5 documents, you guys are gonna be able to knock this out of the ballpark. And there's a ton of stuff we're doing here at 5-level to make sure that you are ready in your skills so you know how to read those documents and you know how to get into that. And so, you know, in the next month, you know, tonight my job is really content review with you guys, but we are constantly, and there's so many great presenters here. I mean, so many of the AP teachers that you guys hear of from AP World are sort of like rock stars in the AP world, history world, and they come up with great strategies on how under time pressure to write for this test. So this is your test. And you will do great on it. Tonight, we're gonna be talking about units 5 and 6. And I gotta say, if there's ever a night where my geeky, nerdy side comes out, it's tonight. I love units 5 and 6. I know. You guys are like, are you crazy, Mr. Zucker? That's crazy, man. You get crazy over history? Yeah, I do, especially units 5 and 6. Unit 5 and 6 is all about industrialization and imperialism. And we're gonna make those connections tonight and talk about it. I think you're gonna get, I'm hoping you're gonna get as excited as I get about this. So by the way, if you're joining us right now, I want you guys to go to the following place. If you can go to slido.com, okay, slido.com, and I want you guys to put in this code and put in your name. We're gonna give this a shot. I tried it last time, it didn't work out because I messed up on the technology, but I'm gonna try it again and see if it works. Sri Debbie is like, oh man, here we go again. We're gonna see if this works. It's a great site on, like, as you're doing presentations, to do like polls and games and stuff like that. So we're gonna give it a shot and see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll go on, we'll move, we'll make it, okay? What I'd like to do tonight for you guys is go over the causes of the Industrial Revolution, the impacts to society, and then I want you to see how there's a connection between the Industrial Revolution and imperialism. These 2 units are not separate from each other. There's a really fine line between the 2, and it's really gonna be important, guys, that you see that connection between those 2, because I think that will help you out a lot. So what is that connection between the Industrial Revolution and the period of imperialism? I want to take a look at what people's justifications for imperialism were at their time period, and then talk about native reaction. So King Dan of Denmark said cause and effect, and yeah, you know, King Dan, thank you so much for doing that, by the way, putting that down there. You know, recently some teachers of mine at my school were going over DBQ skills for their students, and they made such a great point. They were doing a YouTube live review, and they made this awesome point that I think a lot of times students forget. You know, when you jump into a DBQ and you're reading, I think what can happen is you can become passive. And that's very understandable under 45 minutes, is that you might look at that and just say, okay, I'm just gonna wait until this information like comes to my head, right? You do not wanna be that way, guys. I mean, honestly, I can't push enough for you guys, and you guys are smart. You guys are intelligent students. You know better than that, because you know how to think through this stuff. What your teachers have been teaching you all year long in class is to not be passive. I want you guys to be as proactive as possible. As you're reading a DBQ question, I want you thinking, oh, wait a second, I know the answer to this. I don't even need to read the documents because I remember this stuff from class. I'm just gonna read the documents now to sort of like verify it and give validation, okay, off of that. As you're reading a document, I want you guys thinking, as you're reading that document, wait a second, I know what this document, I mean, I don't know the document, it's the first time I'm seeing it, but I know where it's going because I remember the context from my classroom, okay? So that's the way I want you guys thinking off of this in order to make your connections that are gonna happen here, okay? Be as proactive as you possibly can, okay? Okay, so let's get started off of this and let's get going, because this is awesome kind of stuff here. And there are a lot of great AP teachers out there. Steve Hemler is amazing. I love that guy. I'm jealous of him because he's like a YouTube star, but he is amazing. So let's get going here, guys. Before we jump into the Industrial Revolution itself, I want to start off with some contextualization. And yes, when you're thinking of your AP test that's coming up, you guys all know you got to start off with contextualization, right? And we all know that contextualization is about those broad themes that you're going to ask. Well, period 5 really starts off with some awesome contextualization. And the contextualization that it's about is all about the changes in ideas. And the first big one is the Protestant Reformation, okay? So the Protestant Reformation gets started with this guy, I'm sure you guys all remember him, Martin Luther, nailing that 95 Theses up on the wall of the church. I don't know, I've heard different stories about that. I've heard that he actually sent it to a bishop, and this is a little bit of a story, but whatever, not that big of a deal. He put 95 Theses up on a wall and said, hey, I'm gonna challenge Catholic Church authority. Now you might notice over here that I have this thing about Protestant Reformation calling for decentralization. I'm gonna ask the group here that's over here on the side what you think I mean by that. When I say that they're calling for decentralization, what would be your guess that I mean about that? Because that actually is really important. And please answer while I'm talking. I want you guys to put that down there. Right now I'm vamping. That's a term that we do when we're trying to fill up space before things go. And I know too that there's a little bit of a lag on here, so it takes people a little while. But I'm getting some excellent answers already. King Dan, Denmark, Nicholas, Sophia, Kiki, Aisha, all of you guys, awesome. All of you guys are pointing to the attack on feudalism. And you're right. You are absolutely correct. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of a modification on that, because I think you're right, but I think there's a little bit of a modification we need to put. So Martin Luther did attack feudalism. He did attack the centralization of authority. And remember, centralization of authority is so important, because that's what goes back to like units 1 and 2 all the way outwards, right? All of the empires that you guys have studied about, what's the one big political theme over and over again? Centralized authority. Why they centralize authority? So they could find resources and feed their people, okay? Martin Luther is attacking that. He's attacking centralization of authority, like you guys are talking about in feudalism. He's attacking that. But here's where I'm going to challenge you a little bit off of this. Martin Luther, on the one hand, challenged the Catholic Church. And at one point, some people said to him, hey, Martin, you know, there are these farmer guys out in Germany, and they're rebelling against the landlords because they think those landlords have too much power. What do you think? You know what Martin Luther's response was? Crush them. Martin Luther was not this guy that we think of that was like, get rid of all centralized authority, let's make everybody equal. That really was not him. He believed in hierarchy. He believed in centralized authority. He just didn't believe the Catholic Church should have that centralized authority. He believed that we ought to go to the Bible for ourselves, read the Bible, and determine our religious beliefs off of that, okay? Now, why is that important for us in the big long run? It's important because it starts a path going. Not necessarily the path he wanted, but the path going about this challenge against centralized authority and a belief in individuals. And this is where we get to the next guy, and I love this guy. I don't know how many, I'm going to take a poll here and see really quick, how many of you guys saw The Matrix? Because now I'm feeling old. For me, The Matrix was big when I was young, but now it's just like, people are just like, dude, that was like a long time ago, whatever. Oh, I've got some fans. Yes, awesome. So you guys saw The Matrix, awesome. What do you think it was about? I'm just curious. I want to see what some of your ideas are on what The Matrix was about when you saw it, those 3 movies. Crazy movies about how robots take over the world, but that's not really what it was about. Do you guys get what it was about? So Mo is saying breaking out of the system, cool. Yeah, definitely was an action movie. Some really good action, at least for that time period. Now it's kind of the graphics are a little bit old and stuff like that. But yeah, I like the fighting scenes myself. So Nicholas gave a good one about perceived reality. That's going to be important. I want to come back to that. Nicholas, it's a really good answer off of that. So I'm getting some really good answers off of this. I think you guys are getting there. If you've watched The Matrix, the very famous scene that everybody knows is that guy Morpheus who sits down with Neo. He's like the main character of it. And he offers him a choice, like, do you want to get out of the Matrix or do you want to stay in the Matrix, right? And Neo chooses to get out. Obvious, that makes sense, right? But it actually goes back in philosophy. It's going back in philosophy to this guy, Rene Descartes. And here's what Descartes said. Descartes said, look, how do we know that we exist? Now, I know what you're saying right now. You're like, Zucker, come on, dude. Are you kidding me? Of course I know I exist. And by the way, so did Descartes. He knew he existed. That wasn't the point. Philosophers like Descartes asked the question, how do I know I exist? Not because they don't believe they exist, but because they want to get to an answer about who they really are. How do we relate to reality? And sort of like the Matrix. Like when we look at the reality, is it really the reality we think about? And so Descartes said it's not. Descartes said, look, I want you to doubt everything. Anything you've ever learned. In fact, you guys could do this. Doubt everything. Doubt me. Who am I? I'm this weird guy on the computer, right? Telling you things. Why am I right on things? Why is your political leader right? Why is a traditional leader? You doubt everything. And what's the one thing, what is the one thing in the end that you know? So Mo put down, I think, therefore I am. And Mo, you're right. Sophia, you're right. Although I want to challenge you on that. A lot of times when people think that, they think that what Rene Descartes meant was, I think therefore I am means that I come up with opinions, and therefore I am, right? That's not what he meant. What he meant was this. If I can ask that question, like right now, I can ask you a question. How do I know I exist? The only way I can ask that question is if I exist. If I don't exist, how am I supposed to ask that question? Which means my existence means it's based on my rationality, my ability to have consciousness. Yeah, exactly, Tanya, you got it. It's the ability to ask a question. I can't ask a question if I don't exist. So therefore, I know that the thing that defines me is my rationality. Now what I can do is take that one thing I know. I can doubt everything else, but that one thing I know is now my foundation, and now I can start thinking. Now, you might be like, dude, okay, why does this matter? Who cares, right? Think about this. Do you guys see the similarity between Descartes and Martin Luther? You guys see where they're kind of similar? Sri Devi, I just broke your brain. Thank you. Wow, I just blew their mind. That's awesome. I love it. Do you guys see the similarity between Rene Descartes and Martin Luther? You guys got it. Exactly. While they're very different, the commonality that you guys see here is that both of them are questioning centralized authority. They're both saying, you got to go back to the individual. It's the individual who's got to use their brain either to go to the Bible or to go to philosophy. But in the end, that's what you got to do. Okay, off of this. Okay, so the next place that we go to for revolutions and ideas is the scientific revolution. And there's something that's really important with the scientific revolution that I can't stress enough. So far what we've talked about is that we've talked about religion, we've talked about philosophy. Science is going to take us in a similar direction, but also very different. So far, if I go to the Bible, okay, I have a faith that the Bible is a holy book, right? Just as much as somebody who's Islamic is going to go to the Quran, or somebody who is Hindu is going to go to the Hindu texts. Okay, they go to these sacred texts to find truth. If I'm a philosopher, I go and I meditate and I think about what I believe in, right? A scientist would come along and say, yeah, no, you can't do that. Because all of those things in the end are just based on speculation. They're all based upon opinion in your head, right? How do you know that those opinions in your head are correct? Like, for example, I'm going to hold up right now. I got a glass of water here, right? I'm kind of hungry out here. It's about 5:14 out in California. So it's getting close to my dinner time here. And I would love for this to be a cheeseburger. That would just be so awesome. And I'm out in California. So for me, In-N-Out is a big thing, right? So I would love for this to be an In-N-Out cheeseburger. That would just be cool. And right now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to bite down on this and I'm going to have dinner. Okay, off of this. Yeah, no, I don't think that would be a good idea, right? Because I know it's a glass. And if I do that, I'm going to end up hurting myself right off of this. But how do I know it's a glass? It's not because I meditate on it. It's not because I speculate on it. It's because, here you go. I can tap on it. I can see it. I could try and smell it. I could touch it. I know it because I can use my senses. There's a term we use for that in science. It's called empiricism. Ooh, big word. This is an awesome word. Okay, use this word in class. Trust me, teachers will be impressed. Okay, empiricism basically means, so Tanya, you got it right, but it's spelled with an E. So it's EMPERCISM, okay? Not a big deal, but just for your knowledge off of that. So that's empiricism. Empiricism basically means this. I go to empirical things, concrete things, to know that it's true, okay? So like this computer in front of me, how do I know it's a computer? Not because I reflect, not because I meditate, not because I go to a holy book, because I can touch it, right? I can see it. I can actually use it with my senses. Think of what's going on right now with the coronavirus. How are scientists going to figure out a vaccine for the coronavirus? Are they going to meditate in some room about it? Are they going to go and think about it for a while? Are they going to go and like use their philosophical? No, they're going to find people who are infected, and they're going to use the stuff. I'm not a scientist. My wife is, and so she'll laugh when I'm explaining this. But they're going to find people who are infected, and they're going to take the stuff that's in their body and put it under microscopes. Okay, and they're going to figure out who's got the antibodies and how to work with that and all that. My wife is laughing right now. She's sitting right next to me, and she's just like, no, it's not how it works, Zucker. But, I'm close. I'm close. She said I'm close, so that's good. I'll take that, so that's good. Here's the big thing, guys. It's so important. So let's go back again. What's the commonality now between Martin Luther, Descartes, scientific revolution? You guys get what the commonality is? They're all very different, but what's the commonality? Questioning social norms. Nicely done, Tanya. What else? Rethinking. Leah, thank you. Good work. Aisha, questioning her status quo. Nicely done. Georgia, Georgia. Go Georgia for the score. Nicely done. Challenging authority and ideas. That is so important, especially when you think of the DBQ coming up, guys. I want to make a point here as you guys are doing this. So how to perceive reality. Nicholas, nicely done. Tanya, okay, evaluating what is thought of. Okay, you guys, you just did contextualization for a DBQ. So if you guys were to get a DBQ about, unit 5 and 6, right? And you're wondering, how am I going to set up contextualization? You just did it. Okay, by talking about how in general, this is a time period of challenging authority, challenging wisdom, challenging feudalism, challenging our status quo and ideas, that's contextualization. You just got it. Notice that you're not giving me specific facts or examples, you're giving me themes and broad ideas. That's what contextualization is. You got it. Nicely done off of that. Good work. Okay, so all of this then ties into the big thing that's going to move us towards the Industrial Revolution. So I know right now you're thinking, God, man, when is he going to get to the Industrial Revolution itself? I want to hear about that and what that was going on. Well, the next step does that. And King Dan is like, yep, come on, Zucker, move. Okay, the next big one that moves us in that direction is what happens with something called the Enclosure Movement. Okay, so in England, that's where the Industrial Revolution gets going. Here's the story of England. By the way, before I jump into that, one thing that I want to do really quick, and trying to figure out how you're going to study for this test, right? There's a lot of stuff. It's like, oh my gosh, like so much stuff that's here. How are you going to do that, right? I want you to think of history as, I know, shocker, right? A story. Okay, it's in the word, I get it. But here's what I mean by that. When you guys were little kids and you go to your mom or your dad or, your guardian, people are watching over you and be like, I really want to hear a story tonight, right? You didn't know what that story was, but you always knew the elements of the story. You knew a story would have a beginning, it'd have some kind of major conflict in the middle, and then a resolution at the end, right? That's the way I want you to think about history. What's the beginning? What's the middle part? What's the end? And here we've got the beginning, this enclosure movement. And King Dan got it. King Dan said a moment ago, it's all about privatizing land. And you're right, that's really good, King Dan, as a way of thinking about it. I'm gonna put a little bit of a modification off of that, but overall, you got it. That's what it's all about. Here's what the enclosure movement was. For centuries in England, under feudalism, for centuries, lords of lands would allow people to be on the land. So if you were like a serf, they would just say, yeah, I don't care, you can be on my land. King Dan just described it. It's community land. Now, King Dan, one thing I'll change about that, and maybe I'm misunderstanding you, and you're welcome to tell me I'm wrong off of this. It's not community land in the sense that everybody owns the land. It's community land that the lords own the land, but they would allow people to live on the land, okay? And there was a benefit to this. If you're a serf, you get to eat. So every morning you'd come out of your house and kind of wander around and pick up scraps off the ground. Like, here's the wheat that's grown here. I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to go use that for my family. If you're a lord, you love this because these guys who are cleaning up the land, would clean up the land, you can make stuff on it. Okay, that worked out really well until the 1700s. In the 1700s, the lords were like, nah, I'm done with that. I'm all done with that. We're going to kick these guys off the land and we're going to enclose the land. Why? Because I want to mass produce as much stuff on the land as possible, and these guys are in the way. Get them off the land. I'm greedy. I want my stuff, right? Pretty cool for them. Now, you might be thinking in your head, oh my gosh, this is like horrible, right? I mean, these poor guys are being kicked off the land with their family. This is terrible. And yeah, it was, except here's the odd thing about history. A lot of times things that happen that are pretty bad have unintended positive consequences. And that's going to happen here. Here's what happens because of the enclosure movement. And it wasn't intended this way, but it happened this way. Number one, we got a lot more food, right? And number two, where did all of these people go? You guys can probably tell me. Where did all of these people go who got kicked off the land? There you go. They went to cities. And it just happened that the Industrial Revolution was happening at this time, which meant all these people started to make stuff in factories. So now you got the food to support them. You got the people working in these factories. Huge coincidence. And yeah, you're right. It's a coincidence. It's not planned. This is a coincidence that this is happening. Now, you might think that I'm saying this is like overall like a good thing, a positive thing. There are going to be some problems here that we're going to have to come back to. But for the moment, there we go. Okay, so we're going to give it a shot. Let's see if this works. I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to give it a shot here. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll just move on to the next slide. So we're going to try this whole Slido thing. Please make sure right now what you want to do is go to slido.com. put in that code, and it's right over here, 7341. Okay, it looks like most of you guys are getting in there. Now, when I click on this, and I tested it before, the next slide should give us a poll that you guys can do quickly, and it's really like a quiz question, kind of for fun. We're gonna see if it works. If it doesn't work, I apologize to you guys. I really apologize. I tried to get this to work. You can even see my name there, James, on there. I tried to get it to work, so we're gonna give it a shot. Let's see if this works, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Let's see if it works. So, 1 second. I just gotta move to the next slide. Ah. Trying to get my, here we go, okay. Let's see if this works. It worked, there we go, okay. Are you guys getting it? I think it's working. I think it's working. We might actually have this. Do you guys see the slide? Are you able to do it? Okay, let's see how we did off of this. It's gonna close up in just a second. We're gonna see it actually worked. I actually got it to work. Let's see how you did. Oh, you guys are awesome. You did not fall for the trick. Nicely done. So here's the big one that most people tend to think when they see this. And by the way, it's important for your AP World History test. I can't stress it enough. A lot of people think that the Industrial Revolution ended slavery. Please do not go in that direction. I can't tell you how many times I see that on like essays and DBQs at the end of the year. The Industrial Revolution does coincide with the end of slavery, and there's a good reason for that. What ended slavery really was during the time period of mercantilism, and it's because religious movements, Christian religious movements in Britain were able to put an end to slavery. And that did increase indentured servitude. That's absolutely correct. By the time we got to the Industrial Revolution, slavery is gone. And there's a good reason why. So I know this is gonna be a little crude, so I apologize, so just stick with me off of this because this is actually really important for you guys to understand. Slavery cannot exist with the Industrial Revolution. They cannot exist together. Whenever I say that, students are just like, really? That's crazy. How is that possible? Of course they can exist together. It doesn't make any sense. They can't. Here's why. If you're a farmer, slavery can exist with farming. And here's why. Farming every year doesn't necessarily produce a lot of yields. But if you don't have a good year with farming, you still have the land. And so overall, what's going to happen is you hold on to your slaves because you need them to make things. And the next year you have them make things. In the Industrial Revolution, businesses go in and out of business all the time. If I own slaves, and I'm in the Industrial Revolution, I know, horrible example, but go with me on this. If I own slaves, and it's the Industrial Revolution, okay, and my business goes out, like I no longer have that business, it fails, which happens to most businesses, then I no longer have a factory, I have nothing to build, but I got a lot of slaves. What am I gonna do with them? Now, I know a lot of people when I say that will say, well, you can go get a factory somewhere else. You can go get land somewhere. No, I can't. I don't have any money to go do that. My factory went out of business. So now all I've got is a bunch of people who can't do anything. That's why the Industrial Revolution has to have free labor. Now, don't get me wrong. We know very well from AP US history, right, that the Industrial Revolution does not end racism. It doesn't end racial hierarchies, but it does come after slavery. So it's really important. I want you guys to see that because that's really important, okay? Okay, having said that, then let's go to the next thing right before we hit into the Industrial Revolution. Coming out of this time period, another big thing before we get into Industrial Revolution is the nationalist movements and the new revolution. So you guys might remember this from the year. The big one that takes place in Mesoamerica is going to be Simón Bolívar. Simón Bolívar, coming from South America, is going to push for this idea of local representation. Okay, and he is so important for understanding this time period. A lot of times people think of this time period like the Simón Bolívar as being about like revolutions of the working class to take over and create equality. No. Simón Bolívar was a middle class, what was known as a Creole. That was somebody who was of Spanish blood, but born in America. And he actually saw the lower classes as being like the mob. Like he was worried about them. He was really scared that they might cause too many problems. Okay, and so because of that, he wasn't in favor of having them have power. He was in favor of using them so that he could get power off of this. Leah, I see you say, could you possibly make the PowerPoint screen bigger? You know, for me, the problem is, and maybe I'm not doing something correct here, if I do that, I can't see your text. So I'll try and move it around so you can see it. But I'm trying to move my screen in a place where I'll be able to see your text at the same time. So sorry if that's causing a problem. So I'll try and move it back and forth. If you can't see anything, something, let me know in the text, and I'll try and move it over so you can see it. The next big one that's really important this time period is the Haitian Revolution. This is the one and only successful African revolution that establishes completely an African-led island, a republic, that allows for local identity for Africans to escape slavery. So why is this important if it's the only example? Because it provided a model of inspiration for Black slaves across the world. And even though in South America, there were a number of Black slave rebellions that failed, but they were inspired by this Haitian Revolution that took place. The other big one that took place this time period is the Italian Revolution, led by this guy. His name is Giuseppe Garibaldi. Giuseppe Garibaldi attempted to take Italy and unify it together. He wasn't really going to succeed, but there were people around him who took that movement and did succeed and made Italy into a country. And then last off is going to be Otto von Bismarck, who in many ways, Otto von Bismarck is not a revolutionary. He was a conservative landowner. And I want to make a big deal about this. When I say he's a conservative landowner, I don't mean conservative from our viewpoint today. Like if you live in America today, conservatives are of a certain brand, but they back at this time period would be known as liberals. They're not conservatives of this time period. So what's a conservative of this time period? People who believed in the monarchy, people who believed in the landed lords. Okay, those guys who like ran the Enclosure Movement. Okay, so why do I put Otto von Bismarck here? Because von Bismarck believed in unifying all the German people into a one German country. Now, here's the big reason why I make a big deal about all these guys. You know, they're all very different, okay? So we have the Creoles who want local representation in Mesoamerica. We have Black slaves advocating for their freedom. We've got Giuseppe Garibaldi who's arguing for unification of Italy. We've got a conservative Otto von Bismarck calling for Germany to come together. What's the similarity between all these guys? Well, there is a similarity. I don't know, can you guys guess? Let me see, that's a tricky one. Let's see if you guys got it. What's the similarity between all these guys? They're all male, that is true, they're all male. But I mean for the big ideas and themes of this time period, you guys get what it is. All middle class, that's a big part of it. Okay, good. So McKinney, you're getting it. King Dan, you are getting it. Aisha, nicely done, nicely done. They are all nationalists. That's the big commonality. And I can't stress this enough. This is so important for the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is all about economics and trade, right? In order to have that, at this time, you needed centralized nations. Centralized nations are so important. And this is a big theme of this time period, centralized nations. So in the past, we had centralized empires. Now we have centralized nations. Why is that important? Because nations become the place where you can have investment for things like transportation, factory systems, trade, and it's going to lead into imperialism too, where nations are going to go out and conquer other nations, okay, in order to get a lot of the resources they need. So that's why that is so important for that. Oh, we got another Slido to go. Here we go. Let's see if this works. You guys ready? Hopefully you're ready. Hopefully you're ready. Here it comes. Here it comes. Let's see what you guys got off this. So why were nationalist movements so important in the 1700s? Let's see if you guys got this. You got 15 seconds. We're going to see how you guys did really good on the last one. Let's see what happens on this one. Dun, dun. I feel like I got to do the Jeopardy thing here. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, let's see what you got here. Okay, so we got 13% for fought for workers' rights, 56% for the cultural identities, 31% for natural rights. And the correct answer here is they created new cultural identities. So this one actually is a really important part. And here's why that's so important. They were creating new national identities. Poor Kiki. Kiki is just like, really, dude? Come on, man. I picked something else. Tanya's like, no, it's worker. No, sorry, guys. It is cultural identities, and here's why. In order to get the Industrial Revolution, you really had to have these nation states. Okay, and nation states are going to create cultural identities. They're going to be important. By the way, really important off of this, guys, I want you to think of long-term what all this means. Cultural national identities means more trade, it's going to mean imperialism, and it's going to mean World War I. What? Here's why. The reason why it's so important is this. When you get industrialization, eventually, as you're going to see tonight, industrialization leads to the need for raw resources, competition of countries. We get to the 20th century. What do those countries do? They fight each other in a world war. So I want you guys to see this long-term process that's taking place here about like cause and effect. Okay, that's taking place off of this. And I hope that kind of makes sense. And hopefully it'll make even more sense as we go through on this. Okay, so big thing that always gets asked in history is England industrializes first. Why? Do you guys know? I'm going to see you guys got this. Yes, you guys all got it. You're all good. Awesome. Nicely done, guys. Yes, that's the reason why. It's coal up in the north. That's what gets it. Now, Joshua, you said access to rivers. Actually, that is true. Aisha, believe it or not, and Georgia, you're on to something there. The reason why Britain goes first and not, let's say, France or Germany or those is because those countries were going through so much turmoil because of all their revolutions that they couldn't get it going. And a big part of that is that England is disconnected, right? It's an island. It's not having to deal with all those problems on the European mainland. So you're not wrong in what you're saying, but coal is really the big one, okay? The next big one, can't stress this enough. For those of you guys who are familiar at all, if you've talked to students from the past, maybe you have an older brother or older sister who took the AP test a few years ago, there was a big DBQ that was asked about 3-4 years ago, and everybody hated it. Like afterwards, students were just like, oh, that sucked, man. What were they thinking by asking that question? The question was all about railroads in the 1700s. I, a nerdy, geeky old teacher, said, that's awesome. And I meant it. And here's why. The Industrial Revolution does not take place without railroads. Why not? Because you can't get labor moving into cities. You can't get resources moving around. You can't get people moving around unless you have railroads. And by the way, you might be saying, yeah, whatever. Okay, dude, that's cool, whatever. But if you think about it today, guys, think about what's going on today that's changing our world so rapidly. I mean, think of even like this whole coronavirus deal. A lot of you guys are doing online schooling right now. A lot of you guys may be teaching other people. A lot of you guys are going through like things like Zoom or whatever to meet up with friends. That's because we have a railroad today. The railroad is, I know I'm being corny here. We have a railroad called the internet, right? If we didn't have the internet, like let's say this coronavirus had taken place just 10, 15 years ago, that's all it would have had to have been, okay? So somewhere back in like the early 2000s, this would all suck. It would be really bad because we wouldn't have any way to communicate outside of our homes right now that allows us to do the things we're doing right now. I mean, yeah, we have our phones and all that, I get it. But we couldn't transmit the kind of information we're transmitting today amidst all of this. When you invest in transportation, whether it's transportation of people or information, that's what changes things so dramatically. And that's why railroads are so important. Okay, what did railroads do? Allowed people to urbanize, right? So think of that Enclosure Movement, what we talked about. People started moving into cities. That dramatically changed everything, okay? So when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, I know the one thing that kind of like freaks students out is that there are so many different technologies that it's like, how am I gonna remember all the technologies? Here's the good news, you don't have to. This year for the AP test, right, you only have to have 2 outside details. Okay, you wanna try and develop a little bit more than that, but you only need 2. So get some big technologies in your head, the really big ones. Like for example, I would think of something like the spinning jenny. The spinning jenny was not coal-based. It was human body-based and water-based, but it was a good example of where we were moving to, that now we could mass produce more and more cloth. The railroad, like I talked about, moved people around so quickly. The first railroad, by the way, does anybody know? I'm gonna, really quick, let's see if you guys can get this. Does anybody know who created the first railroad? That's one a lot of people get just because it's a big one that a lot of people in class get. It's a total Jeopardy question, so if you don't get it, it's not a big, King Dan, nicely done. George Stephenson, that's it, good. If you guys can just remember that name, by the way, just in case you get this DBQ, it's just kind of a cool outside detail to put in there. George Stephenson created the first railroad. And a lot of times in AP world, you don't need to remember everybody, but this is just a cool one to remember that I think is pretty good, okay? Now, this is so awesome, I love this. If you came to my last presentation, you know I talked a lot about migrations of people around the world. This is connected to this time period. Remember, we talked a lot about this in that last presentation. For those of you who weren't able to be there, what we talked about was that during this time period of the Industrial Revolution, people were moving all around the world. So like today, when we think of issues we're debating about today, immigration, undocumented immigration, Brexit over in Britain right now is largely about the immigration issue. A lot of times people look at it as, you know, that's immigration in my country, right? No, it's not. It's about global changes that are taking place. Now for us, those global changes are taking place under what today is called globalization. Back at this time, people are moving around the world because of industrialization. So as industrialization takes place, people start moving to find raw resources. Okay, things like plantation labor. Britain had established penal labor in places like Australia and New Zealand, but they became a part of the system. You might remember educated people were moving around at this time period within the empire to help build up things. So you might remember last time around we talked about Italians moving out to Argentina. And why were they doing that? To build up Italian projects in other places. Good question. So Che, you just asked about what's penal labor. So originally what it was, and it really happened before this time period, it was when Britain sent people who were in prison to places like Georgia in the Americas. They sent them to Australia. They sent them to New Zealand. And the idea was rehabilitation. Send them out there. They can work on the land, and hopefully that will rehabilitate them. What's important for us off of that is that it was the movement of people in this industrial imperial setting that created more trade. okay? But here's the big one that I really like to talk about, is how the industrialization changed the family. So when I talk about industrialization in class, a lot of times, a lot of students will be like, oh yeah, new machines, new stuff being produced, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, it's much bigger than that. It is huge. On the one hand, the Industrial Revolution gave women more and more rights. Why? Because lower class women had to go out and work. Their families couldn't survive without them going out to work. That started to challenge the notion that women couldn't work out in society. Now, to be quite honest, that's going to take a long time to challenge. Most of the people who saw these lower class women going out to work just justified it as, yeah, they're poor, they need people to go out and work. But if you're a middle class person, right, as a woman, okay, you should be doing what you should be doing. And what you should be doing is the cult of domesticity. Now, here was the idea behind that. The cult of domesticity was that women were made either by God, by natural law, or their psychology to remain in the home. They just didn't have the fiber to go out and really work out in society. They were too nurturing, too caring. They needed to take care of children at home. The man was made to be rough, and he was made to be competitive, and he was made to be decisive. He needs to go out and work out in the industrial centers, okay? Now, I want you to notice something, and this is, it's incredibly sexist, Tanya. I totally agree with you, and I'm not promoting this. Let me be very clear about that. But it's important for us to understand it for a couple of reasons. First off, it's important for us to understand it because today, what so many women leaders and today what we call feminists are fighting against is this, cult of domesticity. In order to understand what feminists argue about today, you got to understand this. Otherwise, you're not going to understand why we have a feminist movement today. This is really what they're fighting against, okay? The other reason why it's important is this. Why did the cult of domesticity arise when it did? Okay, Sarah just asked the question. Sarah just got it. In fact, let's answer Sarah's question, guys. Can you guys see why this is the case? Because the cult of domesticity could have arisen in another time period, but it arose now in this time period. Why? It does have to do with the middle class. That's true. There you go. You guys got it. Nicholas and King Dan, nicely done. It has to do with the assembly line, the specialization of labor. They mirror each other. In people's mind, the factory specializes labor. So the household should specialize labor as well. And so I want you to see that this is why we get this, is this content. And again, this is why, guys, why they stress so much like that contextualization at the beginning of your essay. I know a lot of students think, contextualization, yeah, it's a skill. I get it. I got to do it to get points. No, no, no. We're teaching you contextualization because that's history. That's why I teach this. I don't teach it for that test. I mean, I'd love to see you do well on the test. Don't get me wrong. But that's not why I teach this. I teach it because this is a way of thinking. It's a way of understanding the world. See the context and see how that influences what we do. Okay. Ooh, we got another question from Slido. Awesome. Here we go. Here we go. See how you guys do off of this one. Here we go. Here we go. I blew Shay's mind. Yes. If I can do that, I'm excited. If I blow somebody's mind, I'm just like, got to win today. Nice. Okay. How did industrialization affect social relationships? Let's see how you guys did here off of this one. 3, 2, 1, and most of you guys got it. Good. So yeah, it is families resemble the assembly line. And I really do want you guys to see that that's the big deal with the Industrial Revolution, okay, about where it's going with that. Okay, so what happened with the Industrial Revolution then? The Industrial Revolution, you guys, has a lot of positives to it, and I can't stress that enough. I'm a big fan. I know you might not be. I'm a big fan of the Industrial Revolution, and here's why I'm a big fan. The Industrial Revolution immediately raised people's living standards up, and here's why. If you live on a farm, and nothing against farmers, good people, don't get me wrong, but if you live on a farm, you're much more likely in the globe to be poor. Not all farmers, but much more likely. Why? The reason why is that a farm has limited land. And land is subject to things like locusts. It's subject to poor irrigation, poor fertilization. It's subject to competition with a lot of people. The minute you move into a city can mass produce things. Factories mass produce things. That means no matter what, you will always see what's called an absolute rise in living. Here's what I mean by that. An absolute rise in living would be like this. If I gave you $1 right now, and in 10 minutes from now I gave you another $1, okay, you would then have $2 in your hands, right? You've now gone up a huge percentage, right, from the first $1. No matter what, you have an absolute rise. That's the kind of thing that happens when people urbanize. Because of that, the government at this time period made this argument that they should be laissez-faire, keep their hands out. okay, not get involved. Okay, so I made a nice little positive argument for industrialization, but I want to talk about where the problems were, because there were a lot of problems in industrialization. Industrialization had the following problems to it. Number one, people worked 17 to 19 hours a day. They worked 6 days a week. On top of that, men at this time earned about $6 a week. Women, half of that. And children at this time period made about $1.50 per week. And children had it the worst. Children literally would work from the age of 8 years old on up. They tended to work in places like coal mines. And when you work in a coal mine, you'd have to sort of like scrounge into that coal mine on your knees and kind of like chip away at the walls. That would get dust floating up everywhere. And that dust would get into your lungs. And because you were in a condensed space, it would cause something called black lung. And once you got enough of that dust in the fibers of your lungs, there's nothing they could do for you. So because of that, there were reactions to this. So on the one hand, there was a raise in living standards, but there were serious problems that people faced. So the first type of reaction is known as the union movement. And the union movement was basically a movement based on the idea that workers would collectively get together and they would bargain for things like better wages, better working conditions, and better hours, okay? But there were other people too who advocated for something far more radical. For example, Karl Marx. Karl Marx made the argument that this just did not go far enough. And I want to make a big deal about this. And a lot of you guys right now are posting really quick communism, which is true. Karl Marx did advocate for communism. But I want to make a difference between Marxism and communism because they're not the same thing. Communism is what we saw in the 20th century, and it was bad. Communism was really bad. But Marxism was an advocacy for complete freedom, absolute freedom. Marx would never have agreed with what we actually saw from communism. In Marx's mind, workers who were facing all the problems that we saw, okay, were going to be in competition with people who own factories and would eventually get to a place where they were so much in misery, they would band together, violently rebel. And you're right, one of you guys said abolish the government. Nicholas, you're right. They would abolish the government, and they would basically every day live in complete political and economic freedom. Okay, now there's a lot more to Marxism that I like to talk about that I don't have time to talk about today. But the big thing I want to leave you with is that Marx truly believed that we were headed in a direction in which workers would create a new world, a utopian world, okay? And then last off is the one that some of you guys I think were bringing up earlier, sorry about that, let me go back, is social Darwinism. And that's going to get us to go into the next one. I'm not going to talk about social Darwinism too much yet because that's going to get into imperialism. King Dan of Denmark just noted Herbert Spencer, and I want to get back to that and talk about that in just a minute. But we're running out of time, and we got a lot of stuff to go on. So I'm going to make my connection over here to imperialism really quick so we can move on. But King Dan, you're absolutely right, and we got to go back to that because that's going to be really important. That's the connection, guys, that I need you guys to see that's so important. Please do not see, for this test, do not see industrialization and imperialism as being separate. They are not. They are interconnected together. There's a reason why Unit 6 follows Unit 5. They are connected together probably more than any other unit is. And here's why. Industrialization created the need for resources. Okay, so why does France take over Vietnam? Because Vietnam had rubber trees, and you could use rubber to basically make your machines work faster. Why did Italy take over Argentina? Because Argentina had, get this is crazy. Argentina had a lot of bats. I know bats are in the news these days, right? They had a lot of bats, and what did bats produce? Bats produce something called guano. Well, what is guano? It's basically bats' feces. Yeah, that's what it is. Well, people figured out that guano, you could take dried guano from like the side of a cave and it had nitrogen in it. And you could make dynamite out of it. And what are you gonna do with dynamite? I think you know. We can blow up the sides of mountains and make railroads. So all of a sudden now, and you can do mining, good work. Yeah, nicely done. And fertilizer. Kiki, you're absolutely right. Yeah. All of a sudden, all these areas around the world, people started realizing, you know something, you got a lot of raw resources. We need to get our hands on that. Now, another thing really important. There's another reason why Europeans went out and did imperialism. One is raw resources. Two, though, really important. It's not for labor. It's not for labor. That's our period today. So today we have like sweatshops. That's today. That is not their time period. The reason why they went out is something called overproduction. What's that? It means back at home they had mass produced, and people weren't buying anymore. Why? Because they'd already bought enough of the stuff. They didn't need any more things. Europeans needed people to buy their stuff. And that was the reason why they went out and they started imperializing. Okay, we got another question on Slido here. Let's see what you guys got here. How are industrialization and imperialism connected? Let's see if you guys were listening to me. Let's see if you go for the mistake. Don't go for the mistake. Don't go for the mistake. You got 13 seconds. 12, 11, 10. We're almost there. Let's see what you guys got. Okay, let's see how you did here. I'm clapping you up. I'm clapping you up. 2, 1, and good. You guys got it. Yes. Industrialists needed new resources and new markets. So remember, cheap labor is today. Cheap labor is globalization. Okay. But at that time period, they were looking for new resources, new markets. So good work. Nicely done off of that. Okay. So I'm trying to get to my next slide here. There we go. So another thing that happens at this time period, so important, is the new technology that allows for imperialism to take place. So there's an American admiral. His name is Alfred Mahan. Those of you guys who took AP US history, you will remember this. And if you haven't taken it yet, if you take it next year, please remember this because he's big in American history. Alfred T. Mahan made an argument. His argument was known as naval theory. And to be quite honest, I think he was right. I'm not saying morally right. I'm saying he was right about how this works. His argument was this. He said, if you want to have imperialism, if you want to expand, you've got to have a good navy. And think about why that's important. They're producing steel at this time, right? This allows for things like battleships. And what do battleships do? Battleships go out and they protect trade ports. And so these trade ports now allow for countries to go out and expand, especially with islands, okay, and to create massive areas for trade, okay? Alfred T. Mahan is going to provide the theory behind how places like America and Europe can expand outwards. Now, how do you justify this entire type of system, right? Because remember, and this is like a lot of times, and you might have gotten this in your class. I don't know if you have. Have you guys gotten this whole notion of what's called American or European exceptionalism? Have you guys heard about this at all? If you have, chat in the box. No? You guys ever heard about this? So there's an argument, and to be quite honest, I'm a little in favor of it. It's not a big, like, popular theory out there, but I'm a little in favor of it. The idea is this: America and Europe are exceptional. We are different. And why are we different? Because we have had these great ideas, and we have, right? We've had ideas like natural rights, like equality, like liberty. We have a written constitution. We have promoted things like, you know, it's important to have a government, but that government shouldn't abuse people, right? We've had things like science and the other sort of, that sounds pretty exceptional. It's pretty cool. And I'm kind of sympathetic to that. But here's the problem with that argument that I have a real problem with. The problem is that it hides the darker side of our history. How did we gain power? How did we get to the place that we are at? Well, a big part of it is imperialism. And we justified that using something that came from this guy, Herbert Spencer. And Herbert Spencer's argument was this. He said, you know, Charles Darwin told us in the natural world that species compete against each other, and the ones who happen to have the right genetic inheritance pass those genes on to the next generation. That generation survives, and the other ones die off. Okay? Well, why shouldn't that apply to the social world? Doesn't that explain why we have inequalities amongst people? And so Herbert Spencer made the argument that there were differences between people, and eventually that led into an idea that there were differences between races. They came up with 3 races, one from Asia, one from the European area, and then one from Africa. But then they broke that up into numerous other areas too. And they started saying things like, you know, Western Europeans are more superior than Eastern Europeans and so forth. And this became known as eugenics. Now, when I talk about this, guys, I want you to know how serious this is, because it is very serious. This is also known as scientific racism. You know, before this time we had racism, but racism generally was about how you felt, what your perceptions were. In the late 1800s, we had professors from Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, putting out studies saying they could prove that there were races and there were people who are inferior or superior. I'll give you an example, and this is a real study. It is a flawed study, as we know today, but it was a real study. They actually took people who were dead, and they opened up and looked at their brains, and they would take mustard seeds, like a jar of mustard seeds, and pour them into the brain of this person and shake it up and turn it over. And if the brain couldn't hold those mustard seeds, they'd say, there you go, there's our proof, they're inferior. And they'd produce this in studies. Now, we know today that that study is flawed on numerous levels. But here's the importance of it. Let's go back to that thing about empiricism we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. If you lived in the 1890s and you were somebody going to college and you saw that study, like, you know something, maybe this is right. They've got some evidence to what they're saying, right? They did a study. This made scientific racism look really professional. And that allowed then for people to justify going out and doing things like imperialism. Nicholas says it's fake news, and you're right, Nicholas, it is fake news. But for that time period, people believed this stuff. And by the way, I hate to say this, social Darwinism in some ways is making a comeback today. There are a lot of people who are starting to believe this again. So while it's easy for us to dismiss it from the past, I think it's really important that we know about this so that we can combat it today, because it's coming back. Trust me, it is, unfortunately. It's coming back to things called IQ tests. That's where we're starting to see it come back amongst a lot of people, very unfortunately. So there are different types of imperialism that take place. You might remember this. There is what's called direct control. That was where, and that primarily took place with the French colonies out in Africa. Most places, though, there was what was called indirect control. Europeans would go and they would get middle-class natives from the area to run their local society. Okay. Best example of that was in India. Yeah, King Dan, nicely done. The British Raj over India is a good example. That's really important, guys, for future units, because there's a reason why Gandhi eventually sided with the lower class instead of working with the middle class. He was a middle class person. Why didn't he side with the middle class? He sided with the lower class because the middle class never wanted to really give up on imperialism. And I'm not talking about British middle class. I'm talking about the Indian middle class. Why? Because they were given power by the British to rule over their society, but the British were the ones really in charge. Okay, and that becomes really important for us to understand, because this is how the British maintained control. It's how the French maintained control. It's how the United States maintained control in a lot of areas, was using the people in those areas, okay, to maintain those kinds of controls. So we get a number of different types of reactions then to this. Okay, and you guys might remember this from this year. Hopefully you had a chance in your class to go over this. When we think of all the different types of reactions to what happened to imperialism, there are some big ones I want to talk about. The first one is violent resistance, and we saw this, for example, in Africa with a woman named Ya Asantewa. She led her local African tribes against the British. Then there was the Indian Rebellion, or what's known as the Sepoy Mutiny. Out in that area, what happened was the British had been taking away more and more power locally, okay, from local Brahmins, who were sort of like the priestly class of that area. And that eventually led to a rebellion in which both Muslims and Hindus fought back against the British of that time period. There was also the Mahdist War in the Sudan. It's a good example of where Islamic leaders in the Sudan rose up against imperialism. And eventually, it initially succeeded, but eventually the British came in and crushed this rebellion. I want you to notice something that's common about all three of these. All three of these were based upon local identity and local religious identity. So Ya Asantewa went with African local religious identity. The Indian rebellion was based on Muslim and Hindu rebellion. And then the Mahdist War based upon Islamic rebellion. By the way, guys, not that this is directly connected to this, but oftentimes, just to give you a heads up on this, you know, when we talk today about some of the problems around the world, like Islamic terrorism, when we talk about it today, a lot of times in our national conversations, we talk about it as if, oh, this is connected all the way back to the beginning of Islam, right? And this is always, no, it's not. This is connected to the 20th century, not to times of the past. Those types of movements arose in response to European imperialism and a fear of a loss of identity. And so that's why, again, context is so important, okay, when we're talking about this. Ooh, I think we have one more slide before we're done today. Let's see if you guys can get this. Let's see if I can get there. Oh, hopefully. Okay, here we go. So why were Europeans able to take over areas in the developing world? Did I lose you guys on this? I think I pressed the slide too much. No, the voting closed. Let me see if I can get back to it. Oh, here we go. Maybe this will work. Here we go. Okay, sorry about that. I clicked on too many clicks there on my end. Sorry about that. Hopefully we can get it now. Hopefully. It might still be closed. I apologize if it is. So let's see what you guys got. So why were the Europeans able to take over? Let's see what we got here. Yes, you guys got it. Nicely done. Mechanized weapons. That's really big. So guys, here's your connection again to the Industrial Revolution. So again, you know, when we're looking at Unit 5, Unit 6, there's a huge connection between the two of them. You know, we talked about the issue of overproduction. We talked about the issue of looking for resources, but here's another connection that you can make off of that one too. The creation of mechanized weapons, mass production of that really allows for something like imperialism to take place. So see that connection, because if you get a DBQ question about cause and effect, change in continuity, it's going to be really important that you're able to do that, okay? Okay, so let's see. Ooh, Georgia. I think, I'm sorry, this is the first time I've ever gotten to this point. I don't know what this is, but I think Georgia, you got first place. Nice. Lucas is in second. Isha is in third. Nicholas fourth. Olivia fifth. Nicely done, guys. Nicely done. Okay, and it looks like That might be the end of my presentation. Okay, there we go. I was a little surprised by that. Okay, so really quick, guys, we do have a few minutes left here. Do you guys have any questions for me? Is there anything that you guys wanted to ask? And my presentation is just going here, and it's just not stopping. So let me see if I can stop that for you guys so it doesn't go through the whole thing. So any questions that you guys have for me off of this? Here, I'm going to click out of my presentation just so I can see your questions here. Let's see. How important is the... Sorry about this, I'm just trying to get there. Is the Trail of Tears in this unit? Oh, great question, that's really cool. You know, I don't know that it's really important for AP World in the sense that because we're looking at the global scale, but what I would say Trail of Tears, I teach AP US too, so I do think it's very important. I think the reason why the Trail of Tears is so important, and it really is that it deals with how centralized governments were dealing with indigenous people that they had conquered in order to centralize their country. In America, the way that we dealt with it was to push people off of the land and then eventually push them on the reservations. Then we tried to assimilate them into our society. And today there's much more of like a respect for their culture off of that. And I think where that becomes similar around the world is that this tended to be the response to indigenous people as they were doing imperialism, was sort of like to try to push them out of the way, put them on reservation systems, and eventually try to assimilate them into their culture. So I hope that answers that a little bit. And that's where I think there is a similarity there to think about. Leah, how did they resemble the assembly line, this whole notion of like cult of domesticity? Good question. So the cult of domesticity, the idea was women would be in the home, they would raise and rear children, men go outside of the home to work. Then when they come back, women were supposed to create this environment where it'd be like nurturing and caring, so then they could go back into that social Darwinist environment of competition. So everybody had their role. A woman's role by her nature was to be in the household to raise and rear children, to make a comfortable place for her husband. Her husband's job or role was to go out into society and lead and make things. So it was like assembly line, like specialization of labor. I hope that helped out a little bit off of that one. So a lot of the questions you're asking after that look more like they're about, you know, how you do on the AP test off of that. We're running out of time really quick, so I'm just trying to get to any of the questions you have off of this. So was the cult of domesticity mainly Western? Or was it an idea of foreigners distrusted? So cult of domesticity is Western. Okay, it's Western in the sense of like America and Europe. They wouldn't have used that term in a place like China or India, but it's similarly believed in China and India and other places. The idea that women were supposed to be in the household, that's a part of patriarchy pretty much everywhere. We just have different names for that as to where it goes, right? So cult of domesticity, very much a European and American idea, but there's a commonality that you're going to find it pretty much in all societies of that time period. Okay.
We're going to go get the...
Having some conversations with my family right now, so we're finishing up here. That's okay. Any other questions you guys have off of this? Okay, so at the very beginning, one of you guys said he's the guy who gives us inspirational speeches. And yes, I do. I do give you inspirational speeches. So I want to end this, guys, by saying this. You know, Unit 5 and Unit 6 is so like, I love teaching this stuff, and I hope you got that energy right now, just because I think there's so much interesting stuff that connects to our time period. And I hope, too, that what you saw in here was some really good themes and context for you guys to do on the AP exam. And I just can't stress enough, guys, this is your test this year. Okay, if you get these kinds of themes and context and just a few outside details for each one of your units, okay, you're going to knock this test out of the ballpark, because that's all you need. All you need are some themes, some specific outside details, and then let the documents guide you. Okay, my big advice, and everybody's saying this, you go to the prompt first, understand what that prompt is asking you for, and the way you do it, really simple, look for historical context, historical thinking skills, time period. Take you 30 seconds to do. Then go to the documents, let the documents guide you, okay? Then group those documents up, okay? Put those documents into a few buckets. That's the way my teachers back at school, I've got some amazing teachers over at my school, a woman named Paige Burkholder and a guy named Jesse Carbajal. That's the way they describe it. Create buckets, like 2 or 3 buckets, a political bucket, economic, social bucket. Put your documents in those buckets, okay? And then brainstorm the outside details. How do you do that? Come up with just one outside detail. Think of these 2 units, right? I can't think of outside details. I'm so stressed for this. Railroad, there you go. Okay, now make connections to that outside detail. And all you gotta do is come up with a couple, and then you're all good. You guys are awesome. Okay. You all have a good night now, okay? I'll talk to you later.